So the Iranians have responded to the United States by bombing Al Udeid airbase, which is a United States airbase located in Qatar. So just to show you on the map, here's a map of Qatar, and you can see where it's located. Okay, it's the big yellow square right there, and you know it's obviously a main hub for the United States. You know, when they were withdrawing from Afghanistan, for example, they went and parked all their aircraft and their cargo and all their equipment in Qatar. So it serves as a massive hub. And anyone who's flown through Doha, you know, the international airport in Qatar, has seen, I mean, just that civilian airport is wild, right, and massive. So you can only imagine how modernized and how extensive and intricate all of the equipment is and all of the infrastructure is provided to the United States in these countries. Now, I'm going to show you the varied responses in regards to this strike. So they fired 14 missiles. The Iranians fired 14 missiles. These are said to have been older technology missiles, so not any of their Fatah, or rather Fatah missiles, the newer ones, you know, the hypersonics. It wasn't those. What the Iranians have been doing, which is very smart from a strategic standpoint, is to empty their reserves, their stockpiles of the older stuff, so they can start stocking newer technology and you know, building more of their latest missiles. So, you know, most militaries will do the same thing if they can afford to do that. And just to give you an idea of the claims that have been repeated, so according to the United States, they shot down 13 out of the 14 missiles. And there was a statement that Donald Trump put out, which I'm not going to read because we've got another one I want to read from him. But he basically said that, yeah, they let the 14th one go. And, you know, like he tried to make a big show out of it and everything. And some people were saying that this was telegraphed to the Americans. I think people say that every single time Iran coughs and farts, you know, it's like, oh, yeah, they telegraphed it first. They said that about the Ain al-Assad attack. That one is perhaps the only one that I'm inclined to believe. But, you know, you can't, I don't know where they get this from. Like, you know, Donald Trump says it, therefore it's true. Come on, I mean, Donald Trump can't even tell what time it is, you know. So I wouldn't necessarily take his word at face value. He seems to be a bit deranged, and you'll see what I mean in just a moment. But honestly, you know, I wouldn't. Let me put it this way: even if it was telegraphed, okay, let's say it was choreographed and it was performative as a strike, you're still going to reap a good amount of intelligence by carrying out such a strike. You know, because basically you have the response time, the type of response, the type of weapons that are being used, the level of readiness. You can learn all of these things. So it's not like, you know, even if it's performative, it's not like they didn't gain anything from it, okay? Not to mention that if it's actually performative, well, I suppose that's good in a way, because that means that they're both cooling down, right? But I don't think that's what's happening, and you'll see why in just a second. So this is a statement from Donald Trump, and he released this about what, two hours ago, or something like that. Okay, so it's the most recent one that he's posted, and it's just so it's so funny. I have to read it to you. So he says, "Congratulations to everyone," you know, like he's hosting Jeopardy or something. He says it's been fully agreed by and between Israel and Iran. That's a first for me, because I've never seen Israel and Iran agree on anything, and they don't talk to each other and they don't recognize each other. Not now anyway, you know, after 79. So I don't know what he means. That already smells a bit fishy to me. And then he says there will be a complete and total ceasefire in approximately 6 hours from now, when Israel and Iran have wound down and completed their in progress final missions. What? Okay, for 12 hours, at which point the war will be considered ended. Officially, Iran will start the ceasefire, and upon the 12th hour, Israel will start the ceasefire, and upon the 24th hour, an official end to the 12-day war will be saluted by the world. Now, just before I continue, I know this is very incoherent and bizarre. What he's saying, basically, is that there is a ceasefire, and that he's giving Israel, or that Israel has been given, an additional 12 hours. So the ceasefire doesn't start at the same time. I've never heard of a ceasefire in my life that started at different times for two parties that are two belligerents in a conflict. What on earth is this guy smoking? The whole point of a ceasefire is that you say, okay, we both stop at this exact time on this exact day. It's not, okay, I'll stop first, then you stop in 12 hours after you maybe, like, you know, finished off my stockpiles or my leadership. What is this absolute nonsense? Who would agree to that? No one would agree to that. No one in their right mind would agree to that ever. This guy's he's really on one, honestly. and then he calls it the 12-day war, like it's what's that supposed to be? Basically a reference to the 6-day war. Well, the 6-day war was a war of aggression by the Israelis, and they attacked the USS Liberty, right? And they stole a bunch of land from Syria and the Egyptians, and so they took the Golan Heights basically from Syria and the West Bank and Jerusalem, and they expanded their tentacles, like they like to say about Iran. Yes, so I don't know why he would reference that, like as if it's a good thing, the 12-day war. Well, it's because it's clearly a reference to the 6-day war, and that was a war of aggression by Israel. So, okay. And I know that might shock some of you, right? Because you've always heard that, the Arabs, they attack us, like the Israelis say, the Hezbollah. Okay, so Professor Merendi, who's a great friend and a good friend of the show, he came out and said, no ceasefire, fake news. No ceasefire, fake news. Zionists are in trouble. Now, that's why I was delayed in beginning right now, because I was checking all of the sources and channels, like what have the Israelis said, what have the Iranians said. So I'll show you here. This is from AA. So they're saying that Iran says no agreement on ceasefire with Israel as of now. Okay, so that's two sources I've just given you, and there's a third one from so that's Professor Merendi, first source. The foreign minister is the second source, Araqchi, and there's also CNN, who said they spoke to some Iranian official, didn't name them, but all three of those people or sources said there is no ceasefire from the Iranian side. Okay, so that doesn't bode well for Donald Trump's Truth Social post. Also, here, this is from Yediot Ahronot, so Ynet, that's an Israeli paper or outlet, and they say here that meanwhile the Security Cabinet, so they're talking about Israel. Okay, I'm trying to show you what the Iranians are saying, what the Americans, Iranians, and Israelis are all saying. So the Israelis apparently had a closed-door meeting, right? And Israeli officials confirmed that Qatar had brokered the agreement. According to sources familiar with Israeli assessments, Tehran was seeking an immediate ceasefire, while Jerusalem preferred to extend operations for a few more days to complete strategic objectives. Really? Okay, I'm going to remember that the next time they never. Anyway, so they say still both sides ultimately agreed to end the fighting within days. Israeli officials describe the outcome as a clear-cut victory. Well, Israeli officials would describe what they're doing in Gaza, which involves gang raping prisoners and committing genocide, as not gang raping and genocide. So I wouldn't really take what they're saying at face value either. But there's something off about all of this. You can, as you can tell, the Iranians are saying there is no ceasefire. That's fake. That's not true. There is no deal. And Trump is saying there is a ceasefire that starts at different times. And Israel are saying that there is a ceasefire. What is this bollocks? Honestly, what is this bollocks? So I think what's going on, honestly, is, and some people are looking at this and saying, no, there is a ceasefire, because the Israelis, typically what they'll do in the lead up to a ceasefire is they'll go on a rampage and basically try to exhaust, their dropping of bombs and assassinations. They'll do as much damage as they can right before the ceasefire kicks in. And I have trouble believing that, because what ceasefire has Israel ever respected? I mean, you look at the one in Lebanon, for example, which came into effect the day before Syria fell. Interesting timing, yeah? Totally unconnected. Just their neighboring countries that Israel doesn't like. They have nothing to do with each other. And how many times has Israel broken the ceasefire since then? I lost count. I think it's in the hundreds of times. Someone said 1,000. Okay? So, I mean, does it matter? You have to break it once for it to no longer apply. It's no longer a ceasefire if you fire. So it doesn't matter that the amount of times is irrelevant. And that's not the first one they've broken either. So any kind of deal with the Israelis is not a deal. They're not going to honor their word or their agreement or their end of the bargain, and neither will the Americans. They have a habit of doing that, as I have learned through a lot of my, well, not learned, but shown to you through a lot of my reporting in various theaters and domains. It's not just in the military domain, but also in the diplomatic arena. They never honor their agreements. They have a habit of doing that. In short, Americans lie. I'm sorry to say that, but the American government, the US government, lies a lot. Okay? And some people who are not deprogrammed yet might find that offensive or controversial. Well, I'm sorry, that's your problem. So Well, you know, another theory that's come out that people are circulating about is that perhaps the Americans are doing this on purpose. Donald Trump is saying, oh yeah, there's a ceasefire, and then, you know, when the Iranians, who obviously say there is no ceasefire and haven't agreed to this, break, quote unquote. I hate that I'm even entertaining this stupid logic, but basically what the Americans and Israelis will say is they'll go and play the victim. They'll say, oh my God, we had a ceasefire when there was no ceasefire, and then say, oh, the Iranians broke it, and then they'll just try and use that to justify attacking Iran more. You know, I don't know. It's a bit deranged, all of this, isn't it? So just now in the last couple of hours, you know, nothing has stopped. I mean, the Israelis are bombing Iran. Okay, you had planes just an hour ago flying past Iraq into you know, the Kurd region of Iraq, and going into Iran and bombing it, and they're hitting Tehran. And lots of these are civilian targets. Yeah, and there's also here, for example, you can see the skyline. Okay, so I'm just getting, hold on, I've just received this. Okay, again, this is really bizarre because it doesn't add up to what I just read to you here from a few moments ago from, you know, AA, because they're saying that there's no ceasefire. Well, this is also from the foreign minister. This is from the Iranian foreign minister, from his Twitter. Look what he's saying. He's saying the military operations, okay, of our powerful armed forces to punish Israel for its aggression continued until the very last minute at 4 a.m. So yeah, right now in Tehran, what is it, 5:15 or something like that? Yeah. Together with all Iranian, but he just posted this, yeah. So he's saying, together with all Iranians, I thank our brave armed forces who remained to defend our dear country until the very last drop of blood, and who responded to any attack by the enemy until the very last minute. So now he appears to be confirming it. So I don't know what the hell's going on, but you know, because that conflicts with the thing I just showed you here from AA, okay, where they're also quoting it, and this is updated today as well. So you know, it's obviously in the last 3 hours. So okay, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But I'm still going to show you the rest of the, you know, fallout from this bombing, or rather response by Iran on the US base. Okay, and personally, I'll come back and comment on this ceasefire proposal in a moment. But I just want to show you what happened. You had Qatar basically coming out and blaming, or rather condemning, Iran for striking this US base, which, yes, it makes sense from one perspective. It's not an embassy. It's not like sovereign US soil. It's leased or rented out to the Americans. Okay, it's not an embassy, although many American embassies are bases, but that's a different topic. So I understand that obviously they're going to say we don't bloody appreciate this. That's fine. That's normal. That's expected, right? But Oman, for example, Oman is just next door, you know, and next to Yemen. So they have a different foreign policy. Their foreign policy is not like Saudi Arabia or, you know, Qatar or Bahrain or the UAE. Their foreign policy is a lot more balanced, I would say, and rational. And so what they came out and said is they blamed the United States for the aggression on Qatar. Okay? They blamed the United States, which is interesting, right? Because a lot of these Arab countries that rent out or lease, you know, territory to U.S. military bases, and then say nothing about, you know, the Gaza genocide and do nothing about that. They like to turn a blind eye to what happens through those bases, because they're really providing support, logistical support, for these operations that kill children or kill civilians or kill people in general in Palestine and Syria and Iran and Iraq. You know, the invasion of Iraq, where did it come from? They didn't just, you know, drive tanks through mainland Europe. No, they brought them, you know, they came from Saudi Arabia. They came through the Arab countries in the vicinity. So, and that's in both Gulf Wars, by the way. So, you know, these oil kingdoms, yeah, these Arab kingdoms in the Persian Gulf, They need to take some responsibility, don't they? And here, this is another article, by the way, regarding the ceasefire from the Times of Israel. Look what he said, what they're saying here. So they're quoting the foreign minister, okay, and saying, Iran foreign minister, no final ceasefire agreement. If Israel stops, we'll stop. It seems to me, and I could be completely wrong, but I'm just speculating here. It seems to me that he wasn't told maybe until the last second by the military, but I don't know why. Whether that would be true, because you typically involve the foreign minister in these kinds of things, obviously, especially if it's a so-called deal. I mean, it's a more of a diplomatic thing than a military one. But anyway, it's there's a lot of conflicting stuff coming out right now. Yeah, there's a lot of conflicting stuff, and honestly, given Israel's habit of breaking ceasefires, I think that this is not this so-called deal is not long for this world. It's gonna unravel quite soon, and the Iranians have the capacity to strike. They have a capacity to respond that people in Gaza do not have in perhaps every single domain imaginable. I'll show you this clip from our friend Tadg, who's on Press TV earlier.
The entity, the Zionist entity, and the US have flagrantly, completely and utterly abandoned anything like fair play, anything like rules. As you have been already outlining so well, there are no ceasefires when it comes to the Israelis. They don't acknowledge any ceasefires in Lebanon. They make a mockery of the idea of a ceasefire in occupied Palestine. And I think in this instance, the ceasefire would probably only be acknowledged on one side if Iran were to take that option. I think Israel as an entity is poisonous. I think we can see the amount of destruction and death and murder and mayhem and misery it has brought to the region. It feels like it has played all its cards at the moment. The Western world generally, Western hegemony and the Western narrative has never been so weak. And I think Iran is in a position where it can do literally what it wants in terms of its actions going forward. I think most decent people, most free people in the world right now would like to see this Zionist entity taken care of once and for all. It doesn't feel like it's a moment for peace because we haven't had justice, and I believe that unless there's justice for Palestine, there should be no peace whatsoever for what remains of Zionism.
Yeah, look, I'll just give you an example of how confusing this situation is. These posts are 9 minutes apart, okay, from an Iranian outlet, and on 1 second, so the one that was posted first says Trump's truce claim is fabricated, and then 9 minutes later, it's the statement from the foreign minister saying that they fought to the last minute at 4 a.m., which implies there's been an agreement for ceasefire. So, this is literally fresh. It's coming in right now as I'm talking to you. It's happening as I'm speaking to you. So these are some interesting posts here. I'll show you. I'll read to you some interesting reactions from some people that you might know. And this one is from Dan. He says, at this point, the default assumption must be that any ceasefire is another ploy by the United States and Israel to seduce Iran into lowering its guard so they can assassinate Khamenei and attempt their long-term stated goal of regime change. It would be foolish, to put it mildly, to trust Netanyahu and Trump. I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more with this statement by Dan. I met Dan in Tehran, by the way, last year, so that was really cool. It's just about a year ago, yeah. And he's nailed it right here. This is another reaction from Ali, and he also nails it, and so does Ahmad underneath. They're basically making the same point. So I'll read the first one from Ahmad. He says, I cannot demand that Iran continue the war while the Arabs live in comfort and luxury, going to discos and parties every day. Obviously, when he says Arabs in this sense, with the parties and the discos, he's talking about his next door neighbors in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in the Emirat and Bahrain. He's not talking about people who are suffering under Israel's jackboot in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, no, or in Gaza. Obviously, that goes without saying. But I'll just continue reading this. He says Iran defended itself and brought joy to the hearts of all the free people of this world. 22 waves of missiles and hundreds of drones. Okay, not my words; they're his words. I've been gagged. So I'll continue. This is what Ali said in response. He said, "None of us can demand of Iran on behalf of Palestine anything more than Iran's people, who have sacrificed so much and are willing to give. But even for Iran's own self-preservation, I doubt, quote unquote, Israel paid enough of a price to deter continued aggression. They must beware." So my reaction to all this, I just gave it to you, but I'm going to reiterate it nonetheless, is really more, is not really about, oh, well, Iran didn't do enough. I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at the deception of US and so-called Israeli diplomacy, okay, at the factor of dishonesty that is, you know, that is scores above anything within reason, because obviously diplomats, I mean, are basically, you know, like every embassy is a spy station. We all know that. But, you know, so basically you never expect diplomats, the way they talk in public as well, when they make public statements, it's always like, you know, weasel words, you know, they're trying to tiptoe around the bush. Fine, that's understandable. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about a level of deceit that you've seen in the last couple of days. Do you remember when Trump was basically, just when they started, how did they start? The negotiators were sent by Trump to talk to Iran about supposedly getting back in this deal, and then Israel bombs them. You know, and then they did that thing with the jets, with the B-2s. Oh yeah, we're just sending them to Guam, and then it turns out they've been flying for 30 hours on their way to bomb Iran. They went halfway around the planet, but anyway, you'd have to go halfway around the planet, so that doesn't make sense. But you get my point. There's so many like lies and planted stories in the press that are used explicitly, or rather, no, not explicitly, but shall we say, with the, you know, the only and sole purpose of deceiving and making, and not deceiving in the sense that, oh, this is like, you know, it's a spy game or something. No, this is about carrying out, you know, nuclear terrorism. We're talking about bombing nuclear sites. This isn't a joke, you know. It's like they really want to make these assassinations and these murder operations count. And that's what the State Department is used for. And it's anything but diplomacy, to be quite frank. This is stuff that, you know, intelligence agencies are usually doing. It's not stuff that a diplomat does in the tradition, or an emissary does in the traditional sense. And not to mention the fact that, you know, when the nuclear talks were happening a couple of years ago, the same thing. The Americans are in Vienna talking to Iran indirectly, and then what happens? Israel goes and bombs Natanz. Like, you can't win, you know? You can't win. It's just any kind of, and I gave you the example of Lebanon earlier, and that was brokered by who? By the Americans, again. And that was a different administration. It wasn't Trump, it was Biden. But the deceit, you know, the lies are all there. These elements stay in play, or at play, nevertheless, regardless who is in power. And, you know, it's just this kind of habitual, you know, this habitual patronizing and condescending colonial manner, you know, that they basically strut into the Middle East, and then they try to play peacemaker, and then it's actually just about sticking a knife in your back. So yeah, that's about as much as US diplomacy is worth. So I'll show you a couple of more things. This was posted just a few hours ago as well by I don't know, it was leaked from the Israelis to the Washington Post, if you believe that it's real. I think it's real. And the Israelis certainly seem to be happy about it. So this is, here you can see, it's basically the Israelis calling, or claiming that they had called Iranian commanders, and they're threatening them and their families on the phone. I mean, I don't even know why you would release this, because it just makes them look like thugs. But yeah, let's look at it quickly.
Salam alaikum. داری؟ من از کشوری زنگ میزنم که 2 ساعت پیش سلامی، باقری و شمخانی رو فرستاد جهنم.
So he's referring to, so this seems to have taken place on June 13th, right? And Salami and Bagheri and all these people, these are the scientists and the commanders. Salami was the chief of staff. So, you know, these are the people that were killed on June 13th by the Israelis when they began this war in the first place. So he's saying 2 hours ago, you know, sorry, I meant the head of the IRGC, because they killed the chief of staff twice. Salami was the head of the IRGC, which is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So yeah, regardless, his point is basically like, yeah, we killed your friends or your colleagues, and now we're going to do the same thing to you.
No. الان برای تو به پیشنهاد میکنم. اومد رو خط، بیارش رو خط. الان صدامو داری؟ گوش کن. من از کشوری زنگ میزنم، به توضیح میدم، خوب گوش کن. من از کشوری زنگ میزنم که 2 ساعت پیش باقری، سلامی، شمخانی رو دونه دونه فرستاد جهنم. الان تنها پیشنهادی هم که به تو میکنم، هم میتونم بهت پیشنهاد کنم 12 ساعت وقت داری که پاتو بگیری با زن و بچت فرار کنی، وگرنه تو الان تو لیست مایی. تو دونه دونه تو لیستی که من دارم نگاه میکنم و هدف بعدی ما هستیم. با خاک تو، خانوادت، بچه‌هات، همه رو میزنیم. فقط زنگ
So you see that? They're saying we will hit you, your family, your children, everyone with the dirt. Well, you know, I mean, no one ever said the Israelis don't kill civilians, but there you have it as well, or straight from the horse's mouth. Good to know, right? Good to know how diplomatic they are. So, in any case, I'll show you also some other clips from the last couple of days, or actually the last couple of hours. This is, for example, the top diplomat, the UK's top diplomat, the foreign secretary, right? Allegedly the top diplomat, at least the one who has the title. And just look at this nonsense.
With Iran with no air defenses, with Iran with no proxies that they can rely on, with Iran looking seriously at the firepower of the United States, and we, let's be clear, the United Kingdom will defend all of our people and all of our assets.
What the fuck is this guy smoking? What does this have to do with the UK? Is the UK at war with Iran? No one told me. What is this?
And work with our allies defensively in the neighbourhood. I think this is the
in the neighborhood, yeah, because you know Iran is actually right next to Ireland. It's easy to get them confused. They both start with IR. What are we doing there? What are you doing there? Why are you talking like you're a general or something? You're supposed to be a diplomat. You're supposed to say we want to avoid war, not fucking go to war. Jesus.
Time to get serious about their nuclear program and to step back and comply with what the international community has been urging now for some.
Yeah, what have they been urging? Tell me. Go into detail, right? He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just repeating a script that's been handed to him like a good, you know, lapdog, like a good politician. Here's someone with brains. Okay, this is Mark Botenga, who's an MEP and from Belgium. Listen to what he had to say on Sky.
Mark, I know you've written a lot about how Europe are marginalised, even powerless in this latest escalation between Iran and Israel. Tell us a bit more about that.
By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt because I should have said this a minute ago, but you might find this interesting. But you do know that MI6 is actually under the Foreign Office, so they report to him, which really goes to show you how basically if you work for the Foreign Office, like, you know, I mean, we know embassies are spy stations for every country, but this is like so obvious. Anyway, I'll let Mark speak now. I'm sorry I cut him off. I just wanted to say that because it's wild. It's really wild.
Mark, I know you've written a lot about how Europe are marginalised, even powerless in this latest escalation between Iran and Israel. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I think it's very obvious, especially after this weekend as well. The European leaders, I mean, British, French, Germans, they said, you know, we're going to give diplomacy another try. And at the same time, the United States decided to launch their attack. So I think there's been very few points in modern history where Europe, and be it the European Union or European governments as such, have been more irrelevant than they are today. And this is mainly because they've been running after Trump. You know, they've been challenging sometimes his rhetoric, but in practice, they've not stood up to him. They've not stood up to the choices the American administration has been making.
What role do you think then, having said that the EU, Europe should play?
Well, I think the EU has always been very vocal about international law, human rights. Mm-hmm. And I think they should finally, you know, kind of act upon it because we have seen massive violations by Israel of international law. That is not disputed. Also, international legal scholars are very clear about the attack Israel executed against Iran being illegal under international law. So if, as a European Union, you are serious about international law, then you should act upon it. And you should say, well, I mean, Israel has violated international law. We've seen that. We're going to act upon it. We're going to sanction Israel, or at least we're going to suspend our privileged partnership, the association agreement that links the EU to Israel. So there's a number of measures you could actually take to regain diplomatic relevance. But I'm seeing today that, unfortunately, the EU is not acting upon it.
To be fair, if diplomacy has failed, Israel may say, and they feel under threat by a neighbour with nuclear weapons, legally.
Yeah, but God forbid Iran, you know, Syria feel under threat by a neighbour with nuclear weapons. I wonder who that could be. Starts with an I, you know? The poor Israelis, they're always the permanent victims. They always feel unsafe. They feel like, you know, under threat. Their emotions are a blur.
What other routes do you think they could have taken?
Well, first of all, diplomacy hadn't failed when Israel attacked. Let's be very, very clear about this.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
There was talks scheduled for the Sunday after the attack. So making the claim that diplomacy had failed is just utterly false. The other claim about it was self-defense we had to is also utterly false, because there's no proof of any Iranian nuclear weapon, or even, as the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed, of even a military program by Iran. So basically what the Israelis are saying makes no sense whatsoever in international law. So what other routes were there? Well, first of all, I think we've got a very great experience with the 2015 deal, a deal on the Iranian nuclear program, where the Iranians even accepted to limit their civilian nuclear program by saying, okay, in order to, build confidence, we will even limit that. And that was destroyed by President Trump, during his first mandate. So I think we need to, as Europe, we need to be able to also put the blame where it is. We're very clear and very, straightforward when Russia is to blame for violations of international law or international humanitarian law. Why are we unable to do that when the Israelis do it, or when the Americans do it? Because let's be very clear, the US attack on Iran of this weekend was also perfectly illegal.
What do you want to see from Europe? Because if we look back to, say, the 2003 invasion of Iraq, America didn't really need its allies, but it brought them along. What we're seeing here, that Trump is going it alone as a lone wolf with Israel, not really including the EU. I wonder whether that leaves them feeling weakened and sidelined.
Oh, I'm sure they objectively should be feeling weakened and sidelined, because they are marginal, they're very weak. But the only way to kind of change that is to, stand up for what you're supposed to stand for, hence international law, human rights, by saying some very basic truths and by acting upon them. Very basic truth: Israeli-American attack on Iran are violating international law, hence we will take sanctions. This is what the EU does on so many countries. There's tens of countries throughout the world.
So you think, Mark, that the EU is being too passive then? You're not hearing what you want.
Not only passive, it's just following. It's very difficult today to say, what does the EU really act upon? What is it actually doing? And if it were serious 1 second on its rhetoric in regard to international law, which the EU has used a lot, and rightly so, in regard to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, genocide ongoing in Gaza, we've not acted.
Honestly, that was so funny how she cuts him off. It's like, you notice every time the truth starts coming out, they have to cut you off. And it's funny, like, oh yeah, do you think the EU is weakened by not going to war? Because in their minds, bombing people is a sign of strength. So, they think like it's a jungle, or might is right. Diplomacy is strength. No. That's too complicated. And just to top it all off, here's Donald Trump a few years ago. This is just a 9-second clip, but I think it says, it says a lot.
Will start a war with our president will start a war with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate. He's weak and he's ineffective.
Wow, that's ominous, isn't it? So, yeah, it's looking like there's a ceasefire. It's looking that way. And again, I showed you how conflicting and kind of weird all of this was. Are we going to really call it the 12-day war? I refuse to do that. I'm not bloody doing that. You should still see this, though. This is a bit... So Iraq was bombed earlier, okay, as I was beginning the live stream. And you can see here a lot of various bases, US bases in Iraq were struck, and there's still a bit of confusion whether the Iranians did this. Some people are now saying the Israelis did that. I don't really see that. I could be wrong, but I don't really see that as being plausible, because we know for a fact that these bases have been struck, across many months in the past, and they were struck by what the mainstream media or the meatheads, will tell you are proxies, quote unquote. Yeah, basically Iran's allies in Iraq, and they call them Shiite militias or Shiite proxies. They're not all Shia. They are not all Shia. First of all, that's an incorrect statement. Yeah, they're majority Shia, but they're not all Shia. Their whole focus is anti-imperialism, is anti-Zionism, supporting the Gaza front, and so on. Okay. Anyway, my point here is just that I think it was those groups. and that would be my first assessment or my first, guess. But as of now, as I'm talking to you, we don't know. These are the bases that have been struck. Some of the videos, I'll go through them one by one. So this is Camp Taji. Okay, you can see that on the screen where it's located in Iraq. And here are some videos of it being struck earlier.
رجع تفتر بواحد خطيه هذول الرادار شلون ضربوه؟ طلعوا السيارات سيدي رجع تفتر بواحد
والله مصطفى الجبار هذا صار خطه قلت لك عليه.
Okay, the next base, this is Ain al-Assad. This is the same base that the Iranians struck after Soleimani was assassinated by Donald Trump. It's a coalition base. It's not just housing United States soldiers. It also has other imperialist or Imperium troops. So this one was hit by a drone. That chain gun going off, it sounds like an AC-130, a Warthog, an A-10, which is a tank bomber, which they don't really, which is funny because they used that in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I don't mean the first Gulf War, I'm talking about afterwards when no one had any tanks. Anyway.
مطار بغداد مسيرة.
That's the airport in Iraq, the Baghdad International Airport that was also struck, and that's what he was just saying in the video now.
مطار بغداد مسيرة ضربت ما أعرف مواقع أمريكية أعتقد.
Yeah, and here you can see as well these radar stations that are.
رجع
Yeah, so it's the same video. This is one of the same videos I showed you earlier, but this is apparently a radar station. Now, we don't know if that belongs to, because what the Americans did when they went to Iraq is they de-Baathified, or basically disbanded and dissolved the Ba'ath Party, which is an insane thing, but I'll leave that rant for another time. And then they tried to rebuild the Iraqi security forces, or claim in any case, like they did in Afghanistan. And it's a racket. It's a protection racket. It's like the mafia say, well, pay me or else someone will break your window, and it's basically a threat, right? It's the same thing. They don't care about actual security. That's evidenced by the mountain of corpses that's piled up in those two countries. Everywhere the US touches turns to death. So the only point or goal of that was to sell and peddle US equipment made by the military industrial complex. That's the only point. Dress them up like children in American slacks and fatigues, give them American boots, American helmets, American guns, and of course this makes a shit ton of money for a couple of people in the US. That's the point of it. It's not about actual security. But so when you hear, my point here is, when you hear Iraqi security forces, you might be tempted to think that, oh well, that's not an American thing. But no, actually, so it's very complicated, Iraq, and it's too long for me to put in here, because you also have the Popular Mobilization Forces, which were also brought into the Iraqi army. But basically, Iraq, in my opinion, is still occupied. Do you understand? And not everything that's called an Iraqi army or Iraqi security or Iraqi government installation or outfit necessarily means that it actually belongs to the Iraqis, because the Americans are still occupying their country. Okay, just so you understand that. Just in case that confused you, yeah. I just wanted to make this clear. So yeah, there's Balad Air Base also been struck. You can see here where it is, kind of northwest, of Baghdad. So it's completely possible that the Israelis did this. It's completely possible, right? If their targets were the Popular Mobilization Forces and so on, but why would they hit the Ain al-Assad base? That's not, like I said, that hosts coalition troops. So, the targets just don't make sense that the Israelis would hit them. And I know some people are going to say, yeah, but it's a false flag. No. A false flag is I don't put it past them, of course. It's not beneath them, but this is, a false flag has got to draw in American public support. And there's a fishy story I just heard with the White House, which might, that one looks like a false flag to me, but I don't know if it's true, so I'm not going to entertain it. But my point is just that these targets don't look or sound like things that Israel or the US would hit, right? on the contrary, these sound like things at face value that the PMF or the PMU would hit. So that's why I'm hesitant to give you a certain assessment on it, but or rather a final conclusion on it. There's also Camp Victoria that's been hit. These are all US bases. They're all US bases. Why would the Israelis bomb US bases? I know they've attacked the USS Liberty and so on, but that's because they caught the Israelis planning a war, the Israelis basically wanted to murder the crew, so nothing would get out, no information would get out, because that was an NSA ship. It's a different scenario. It's not comparable to this. So in any case, let's leave this as an open-ended thing for now when it comes to Iraq. But I can guarantee you, and I can tell you that when it comes to Qatar earlier, that was 100% Iran, and they definitely struck that. Now, about the ceasefire, it's looking like there is one, based on what we can see. How long it will hold, I have no clue. Okay, we'll see how long it survives. Knowing the Israelis and their habits, I doubt it will last very long.